This game is impossible. There's no way to beat the game because of how chaotic it is. There are tight jumps, disappearing platforms and lasers, and even enemies to chase you down. This is how I made my game, Chaos Agent. The Brackeys Game Jam 2021.2, an event where game developers get 7 days to make a game using the theme, Let There Be Chaos. Luckily, I'm pretty good at making people suffer from an insane difficulty curve, so this should be pretty easy. Alright, idea. My main ideas in the jam were pretty fitting since the game jam theme was somewhat vague. The first idea was to combine 2 or more games into each other to make a more chaotic game. This was inspired by the latest hit game Splitgate, which combines the key main mechanics of Portal along with Halo to make a fun and engaging game. The second was to make a normal rage game with fast moving bullets and a ton of enemies. And lastly, to make a game where the game mechanics get increasingly more difficult. Now, because the theme is Let There Be Chaos, why not do all of them? I'm now faced with the challenge of how I can combine them. As I said before, I was inspired by the Splitgate type idea, but due to the time constraint, I decided not to combine 2 whole game mechanics. Instead, I would use smaller game mechanics along with the other 2 ideas mentioned to make a game. The idea is to make a game where one mechanic stacks on each level and gets more and more chaotic. To put this into perspective, it goes something like this. In level 1, there is only one game mechanic introduced, the normal platformer movement. So the player can move up, down, left, and right. In level 2, there is lava as well as the normal platformer movement. The player can now die by intentional mistakes. In level 3, there is lava, the player movement plus the enemies that are introduced in this level. In level 4, there is lasers that are introduced in this level, along with the lava, the player movement, and the enemies. All the way to the last level where there are a multitude of game mechanics which hopefully don't cause too much pain. With the idea, I decided it was finally time to start making the game. So first, I started a new Unity project and began working on the basics. We'll need a player movement controller and some basic movement to start off. I spent about 5 minutes making some simple movement code with left, right, up and down movement. The player movement is coming along nicely, but the art is a bit questionable. There's a simple fix to that question: post-processing. Post-processing gives me a variety of effects and just makes the game look better. For this project, I used Bloom, which gives a sci-fi futuristic look. Instead of creating fancy pixel art or complex geometric shapes, I settled on simplistic art using basic shapes like the circle, rectangle, and square. I then added a gray background to make the vibrant colors stand out more. After finishing the art, the game looked a lot better. Finally, with the art done, I began working on the game's main mechanics. I'm currently making level 1, which doesn't have any added mechanics. So we're skipping to the second level. In the second level, I introduced lava, which just has a killable tag, so whenever the player hits it, the player restarts the level. I added a small gap where the player is forced to use the double jump mechanic, which is used a lot in the future levels. Level 3 is where it gets a bit tricky. My idea for level 3 is to introduce enemies that are slower but track your exact location. This way, the player can't stay in one location and has to move forward as to not get destroyed by the enemy. After the enemy was working flawlessly, come on. I ended up searching on Google how to make an object move towards another object in Unity, and it turns out that Unity has a built-in method. So I imported that code and it worked. However, since level 4 gets 100 times harder, we need to pause for a second to talk about how platform mechanics can affect how fun a game is. I've separated the main platform mechanics used in this game into 4 distinct categories. Firstly, there are platformers that feel smooth. This means that the platformer has low latency levels and does basically what the player wants it to do for most of the time. Janky platformer movement, however, has weird hitboxes, bad movement controls, and a lack of control. For this project, we're definitely using smooth movement, and all projects should have smooth movement regardless. The next 2 conditions is if the platformer is forgiving. Well, what does forgiving mean? Forgiving means that if the player does the mistake, how much are they punished? This can include smaller hitboxes so the enemies have a harder time attacking the player, larger ground detection radius so the player can save itself, and much more. For this game, we're going to make the platformer a bit too forgiving. In the later levels, you'll see how much precision it actually takes to do specific jumps and time things correctly. So by adding a platformer that gives maximum control, it allows the player to have an easier time completing levels, which leads to level 4, where timing is everything. Level 4 is where things get chaotic. It adds rising lava, which makes the player go off at a specific pace in order to complete a level. For the rising lava, I changed the scale component for a speed. This makes the lava rise and destroy the player after a while. Now, bear in mind, this game has all the previous mechanics including the enemies, so it's already extremely difficult. But that's difficult enough, right? This is level 5 where lasers get introduced. The player must navigate through the level while lasers are flashing on and off, enemies chasing you, and lava rising. For all the non-programmers, what I did for the lasers is just setting the image component and the collider component of the laser on and off for a specific time which I can change. This way I have customizability for the timing and duration of the laser. I can also use this to make disappearing platforms which cause even more chaos. In level 6, the game makes you question why you're still playing this game. I purposely kept the difficulty curve relatively linear until this point, but it's incredibly hard to make it so easy when many mechanics are added. Speaking of mechanics, the level theme is cannons. Yeah. Cannons fire at a linear rate where the player has to practice in precision again. This level is impossible without dying already. Since you can't wait for the perfect timing because of rising lava, you need to die to reset the lava. With 5 or 6 deaths, you might be able to finish the level. At this point in time, the jam time is running out, mostly from my schoolwork and sleeping. So I'll need to figure out some ideas fast. Yeah, I couldn't think of anything. So instead, let's cause the player more confusion by adding a vignette post-processing effect. Basically, the player won't be able to see anything around them, so they won't be able to see incoming bullets, enemies, or future platforms. So that was the last of adding mechanics levels. Now it's time to make some chaos in the final levels. Alright, chaos. How can we induce maximum pain while keeping the player hooked? It's safe to say that I already did a great job already, but since I have to stay true to making an exponential difficulty curve, I have to make this extremely difficult. Remember when I said I made the platformer a bit too forgiving? See, I've been experimenting around already with making the player jump under the platform. Since the ground detection is so large, the player is able to jump twice under the platform, so this may be useful later on. After completing the level, I decided to play it. I had then realized that the level was actually possible, so that's not good. I then decided to make another impossible level. This is the last level. It's impossible, but instead of making the player suffer through an impossible level, I had another plan. You see, I wanted lore into the game, which can be summarized into a couple of bullet points. The player is stuck in a training program which gets too hard, it's impossible. It's a flawed training program, so the player must skip levels if they wish to do so. Since I know the last level is impossible, if the player goes past that level, I know they skipped it. This way I added a post-game story for the player, giving some energy even though the last level is impossible. After I added a menu and some last-minute tweaks, I submitted the game. I achieved the impossible part pretty well, as not many people thought that this difficulty curve was actually that bad. But yeah, if you want to try the game, it's in the description. Bye.